The mess that's going on, do you think there's an element of him wanting the war to continue? The population of Ukraine at the beginning of this war was 30.5 million, at least officially, that's what they said. If you go back to the 90s, it was well over 50 million. Ukraine has been losing population for a long time because it's a failed state, a terribly corrupt and dysfunctional society. That was true long before Zelensky showed up. The war has made matters worse, so now you're down to, what, between 18 and 20 million people still living in Ukraine? From 30.5 million to 34.5 million, so that's smaller than California now. Can you look this up, Rob? That's it, okay. So, I see the 50 million. I totally see the population from 45 in 2013 to 44 in 2020 to 41. Where's the camera is hiding? It's Rob. So can you come up a little bit, Rob, so I can see? Go look at 2022, just under the 38 line, Pat. So, can you Google Ukraine's population today? Oh my God, if that's the case. Well, I don't know if their data has caught up with reality. These are the numbers coming out of Europe. Oh, it's 2023. So, you're saying, if that can be verified. I don't think it was that high in 2021. I think that's an exaggeration because Ukrainians have been leaving forever. I mean, I've traveled, I've been on business in London and Vienna. Sure. And inevitably, I end up talking to someone who's Ukrainian. They speak perfect English, they're well educated, and I say, well, good Lord, what are you doing here in London? And they always say, well, I can't make a living in Ukraine. I can't survive there. You've got to become part of some mob boss's structure if you want to get anywhere. I don't want to do that. And then, of course, I've said, well, why don't you come to the United States? And they say, I can't get in, So, you're a Ukrainian, you're well educated, you speak English, you're obviously smart, and we can't get you in. We ran this stupid thing called a lottery for years. Every month 2 people's names were pulled out in a European capital. It's just ridiculous. We could have had this guy in the United States where he could have been very productive. That's another story. But my point is, I don't think that original number of 41 is accurate at all. I think several million had already left because they saw no future for themselves. Remember, this also counts Ukrainian citizens who are overseas. They include them, but they're gone. They're never going back. In Germany, whereas this is also the expat workforce. So, this really isn't representing, no, and I've got friends in Germany right now telling me they've got Ukrainians arriving by the trainload every day, and they've told me that in their conversations with Ukrainians, every single person says, I will never go back. By the way, I found this article, Rob, if you want to pull this up because can you pull up this article I just sent you? What it shows in 1990 was 51 million, then a few months ago it was 36 million, and then, if you pull up this article, this says, I don't know what this organization is, TASS, pull up that article right there and go up a little bit. According to a think tank, zoom in, according to a think tank, since the start of hostilities in Ukraine last February, 8.6 million people have left the country and have not returned. I would say that's wrong for my European sources in Poland and Germany. It's over 1 million and climbing every day. And I think TASS is kind of Russian writers controlled by the government. Is that correct? Oh, I would assume so. Well, got it. So, this is a Russian site as well. Okay, got it. Well, I mean, if these numbers are accurate, people are leaving. You also saw the article that came out that people from Russia were also leaving. How much has the Russian population lost in the last 12 months? I think they lost a few 100,000 that left as soon as it became clear there was going to be a war. And frankly, a lot of the Russians that have said when they've been asked about, good, let's get them out of here, they don't really want to be Russians anyway, the hell with them. That's more their mindset. Yeah, interesting. Russian sees historic population, but remember that at least 2 million Russians who were in Ukraine have moved to Russia. Can you go a little lower, Rob? I don't know where you just went. You were good where you were at. Rob, what did you do? You just did some magic there, buddy. Okay, there you go. Russia's historic population drop sparring demographic crisis amid war in Ukraine. Russia to meet up to 1 million immigrants a year for 8 years to maintain current population levels. Go a little lower to see what else the article says. Keep going lower. Not the video. Keep going lower. But Western defense officials have estimated that as many as 250,000 Russian soldiers have been dead in Ukraine was on 1 million. So, particularly Putin, this is BS. It's just not true. These are fabricated numbers. They're just not true. The Russians haven't sustained those kinds of losses. This is Fox News saying this, so yeah, well, they're all part of it. They're all singing the same tune to me. These narratives are cooked up in London by MI6 and in Langley by the CIA. Why would they lie about these stats? Trust me, I'm the same person that doesn't trust. They're trying to get you to believe that Ukraine is winning. Ukraine has never been winning. Ukraine cannot win. That's why Orban, the president of Hungary, came out just recently in the last 3 verses. There's no chance for Ukraine to win at all. Anyone on the ground over there knows the truth. They're finished. The Russians haven't lost that kind of numbers. They've maybe lost 40,000 dead, maybe. Colonel, normally, you'll say people are 50-50ths on this. I don't even know if people are 50-50ths. I listened to Mark Levin give an emotional speech about this himself, about how he feels about Putin. I don't know if you've seen this one or not or where he's at. I think this is an argument where 80% of the population, I may be wrong, the number may be closer to 70% to 80% of the population is closer to defending Ukraine, and they see Russia as the bully. In America, it's very easy to make people think that because, as I said from the very beginning, that hangs on from the Cold War. And remember that the population in New York City, of which Mr. Levin is one, is very much in favor of everything from open borders to endless war with Russia to permanent war in the Middle East against whomever. So, I don't take anything that comes out of New York City very seriously. Well, let's transition into I got 3 more topics before we wrap up. So, the consequences of what's happening with woke in the military. I was in the military, and when I was in the Army Hunters Airborne, there were gays, lesbians, and we knew about it. We went out, we went to Nashville, we partied, and we'd find out, this guy's this, she's this, he's both, she's both, okay? But it wasn't like, hey, let's advertise it as you're a hero and you're this. It was just, that's kind of where you were at, right? Versus today. Now when you hear what you're talking about, the don't ask, don't tell, right? Yes, from the don't ask, don't tell. Today it's the hero-making machine, LGBTQ era. It's a different era we're a part of today. John Kirby rejects bogus claims of woke policies dragging down Army recruitment. There is no wokeness in the military. This is what he said, right? An Army secretary concerned woke military criticism could hurt the service, right? This article just came out. I'll read this entire article to you on what's going on where some are saying, well, the reason why recruitment is low is because of all the woke agenda and all the woke ideology. No, that's not the reason why people are not joining the Army. Army Secretary Christine Wormuth expresses concern about the negative impact of accusations of a woke military on recruiting efforts, stating, I hope that we do not see more of any of the kind of talk that's been out there in the past few days. While Republican lawmakers and pundits criticize the military efforts towards diversity and inclusion, Wormuth clarifies that the Army's focus is on being a ready Army, not a woke Army. She emphasizes that concerns about a woke military have not been a major challenge in recruiting, according to market research and a Defense Department survey. Wormuth acknowledges that some young Americans may be reluctant to join the Army due to the perception of its being woke, but highlights the importance of countering the negative rhetoric, as it can have counterproductive effects on recruiting. She emphasizes the influence of news and social media on young Americans' perception. So, Is the army and the military getting more woke, and is it negatively impacting recruiting? This kind of reminds me of a non-commissioned officer many years ago who told me, and I think at the time, I was a captain, Captain, I've never had intimate relations with anybody but an attractive woman, but I have changed my standards on occasion. My point is, I think Christine, too many drinks at night, at 2 a.m., okay? I think Christine Warmouth is living in a fantasy world. I think that if you're an average 18, 19, 20-year-old man, single guy, who's even remotely athletic, who wants to be tested, wants to accomplish something in life, wants to join an elite organization, and he looks at what's presented to him in these commercials, and what he sees, he says, thank you, but no thank you, I'll go somewhere else. I mean, as soon as we started telling everybody, and this started by the time, even in the 90s, and we saw it begin in the 70s, frankly, this is a long process of what I call rot. If you say that little Susie over there, who weighs 90 pounds or 110 pounds, is just as good as Bob, who's 6 feet tall and weighs 220, and she can do everything he can do and there's no difference, good, you're going to get a lot of Susies. But you're not going to get the other guy. Saying that, well, there's no reason why they can't be in combat. I had an exchange with the senator when I testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee Airland Subcommittee. And he said, well, I don't hear you mention women on the battlefield very much. Are you opposed to women in combat? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, why is that? I said, 5,000 years of recorded military history. If you can imagine, that didn't go over very well. You can force whatever you want on federal forces. But the people that are going to show up and fight effectively for you will not stay. They'll leave. I can guarantee it. It's true for the Marine Corps. It's true in the Army. I can't speak for the Navy and the Air Force. Although I saw recent comments from this man, General Brown, CQ Brown, is supposed to be the next chairman, who is talking about too many white people, too many white pilots. We need more non-whites and so forth. I'm sure that will have a deleterious impact on the Air Force. But maybe it's not as noticeable. Years ago, I had to put together a study. I was on active duty to look at the impact of various experiences and problems in militaries, and I came across the French army between the years of 1850 and 1871. Everyone thought in 1870, when the French army met the Russians and their allies, that the French army would effectively annihilate the Russians. Russians had almost no serious combat experience in their judgment. They'd only fought a 6-week war against the Austrians that wasn't serious in their view. And the French, they fought Mexico, they fought Berbers, they fought the Russians in the Crimea, and they were going to be very effective and so forth. And what happened was the exact opposite. The Russians utterly annihilated them. The point is that the rot that undermines discipline, leadership capability, can go on for years without notice until suddenly you're thrown into the buzzsaw and you have to fight. Then everything that was previously unidentified or concealed comes to the fore. That happened to the British in 1914. It happened to them again in 1940. You have to look carefully at these social programs and policies and the standards of discipline, and if they're not high enough and they don't work, you can't brush them aside. You may get by if you're just going to occupy a forward operating base and you're fighting an enemy that has almost no capability, and let's face it, the people we faced in Afghanistan and Iraq had very little capability. They might be able to get an occasional mortar or rocket, but in most cases, they had to depend on remotely detonated mines, what we call IEDs, and they had AK-47s and RPGs. Frankly, we had absolutely devastating artillery, devastating air power, so there was never any question as to who was going to dominate and who was going to win. You had something similar in Vietnam. We always had overwhelming firepower that could come in and crush the opponent. He couldn't put it together rapidly enough and effectively enough. Well, those days are over, and if we are going to fight someone like the Russians or the Chinese or any of these other countries, we have to come to terms with reality that they do not implement woke programs. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in making people feel good. They're interested in forces that can fight. Soldiers exist to do one thing, to fight and kill the enemy. That's it. Now, they can do a lot of other things, but that's the primary purpose of the whole structure. We've lost sight of that. We lost sight of it a long time ago. Yeah, when you think about that, and then you see a speech that Putin gives and he says, the West, America, it's trying to get their military to be woke. He doesn't use it in his own words, and he says, we're not compromising our values and principles. Here's what we're all about. We're about defending Russia, and you see the applause it gets from the audience. There's a lot of people out there. By the way, when was the last time we got a message like that from our current president, defending America, what a great nation it is, and what it stands for, our values and principles? You can take the same exact message Putin gave, and Biden's done this a few times before where he takes messages from other people around the world and uses that. His writers can literally take that, put it in, and say, change it up a little bit to make it sound like Joe Biden. Put it on the teleprompter. If he gave that message, you know what the American people would do? They would lose their mind. They would either applaud or say, oh my God, who is this guy? But we are not given the pro-America message. We are given the pro-let's confuse the hell out of everybody message, where nobody knows who's a hero today when we once did know what a hero was. Today, we don't know what a hero is. But I want to play this recording for you of President Trump that just came out. And I'm sure you've seen it, and there's a response from the president as well. If you want to play this, everyone, CNN, everyone's playing it, saying, this is it. It's the end of it after this. He shouldn't be qualified to run. If you want to play this, and we'll show his response. That's sick, people. Was your coup against you? Well, it started right at like when Milley's talking about, oh, you were going to try to do a coup. No, they were trying to do that before you were even sworn in. That's right, trying to overthrow your election. Well, with Milley, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said he wanted to attack I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look, this was him. They presented me this. This was off the record, but they presented me this. This was him, this was the Defense Department and him. Wow! We looked at some, this was him, this wasn't done by me. All sorts of stuff. Who's recording? Keep playing it. Keep playing. Wait a minute, let's see here. Yeah, I just got, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, Except it is like highly confidential secret. This is secret information. Look at this. You attack and Hillary would print that out all the time, She'd send it to Anthony Weiner. Yeah, the pervert. By the way, isn't that incredible? Yeah, I was just saying because we're talking about it. And he said he wanted to attack Iran and what? He said, this was done by the military given to me. I think we can probably get it. I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, try to declare. See, as president, I could have declined. Yeah, no, I can't. But this is a problem. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's so cool. I'm looking. We heard Ivan. Can you pause this, Rob? So, who's recording this? According to CNN, the audio recording comes from a July 2021 interview Trump gave at his Bedminster Resort for people working on a memoir for Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff. Okay, so go to his, who's that lady? Who is that lady? Is that one of his staffers? It says here in the article that the people present were a writer, publisher, and 2 of Trump's staff members. 2 of Trump's staff members, yes. Okay, so now go to Trump's response on what he says about this on Truth Social. So the deranged special prosecutor Jacksman, working in conjunction with the DOJ and FBI, illegally leaked and spun a tape and transcript of me which is actually an exoneration rather than what they would have you believe. This continuing witch hunt is another election interference scam. They are cheaters and thugs. So, when you see this recording and you see him talking about Millie and where he's at and Hillary and all this other stuff, how do you process this when you see this recording that the media is using to make sure he can no longer compete for 2024? Well, the first thing that I think is that President Trump is not unlike most of his predecessors in that many of the papers they took when they left office were not necessarily carefully vetted, registered, declassified, or whatever. I think we've over the years become very relaxed in that area. Secondly, I think we classify too much. That's certainly true, and so unfortunate that they're trying very, very hard to pin some sort of criminal action on him, which is of course absurd. Now, his point is effectively true. The Milley and others came across, along with Bolton, and as I recollect, the former Secretary of State, was it Pompeo who said he wanted to run for president and bowed out? They were all advocates for war with Iran. And you have to look at least with Bolton and Pompeo, who their quote-unquote donors are, where their money comes from. They wanted war with Iran. Milley, I'm not sure he was a strong advocate for it. I have no idea, but he certainly wasn't going to stand in the way. We know that McKenzie, who was down in U.S. Central Command, apparently his fingerprints are all over this Global Hawk unmanned aerial vehicle that was shot down. It was plotted to follow the edge of the Air Defense Identification Zone, which under international law says that any military aircraft that violates that zone is liable to be shot down unless it identifies itself, explains its position, and so forth. Of course, we didn't do that, so in a court of law, the Iranians in international law would have won the case. At the time, no one could say what happens if we go to war with Iran. The idea was we gotta go to war with Iran, similar to that which took us into Iraq. The purpose is to get us into Iraq, then we'll figure it out. Very similar to things that were said in 1965 and 1966 about Vietnam. Well, what are we going to do there? We gotta get in there. Let's get in there. We'll sort through that. We'll quote-unquote muddle through. You never muddle through. You have to know what the purpose is. You have to know how you're going to achieve that purpose, and then you have to have a vision for what you want it to look like at the end. We call that purpose, method, end state. Donald Trump, as President of the United States, prevented war with Iran because he asked, first of all, what happens after we launch all of these strikes? What happens? Now, he said at the time, I was concerned about the loss of human life in Iran, which is legitimate, especially since we did not lose any human life. What we did is we lost an unmanned aerial vehicle, which he did not think rose to the threshold that justified war with Iran. And of course, he was right. But it was also a question of, okay, we launched all these strikes, then what? And he had a lot of people in Washington that just wanted to start something and then convince themselves they can drag us in, and that somehow or another, the military will make it work. That happened to us in Vietnam, it happened to us in Iraq, it happened to us in Afghanistan, it happened to us in Libya, and it's happening right now in an attempt to bring us into some sort of confrontation with the Russians over Ukraine. And there's no serious thinking about what are the implications. Iran is an enormous country, it's almost the size of Western Europe, it has a large population. Let's assume that you can destroy Iran. All right, let's just assume you can destroy it with enough weapons. They can't stand up to with their air defense networks or anything else. Okay, so let's assume you're right, we destroy them. What do these people do? Well, they leave. They begin to pour into surrounding countries because there's nothing for them to eat, there's no water to drink. If you destroy Iran, what's the impact strategically on the region? Is there anybody there who benefits from it? Well, a lot of people seem to think the Turks would. Mr. Erdogan would then emerge as the preeminent power in the region because Iran's really his principal Rhinestein. Yeah. So why would you do that? Does that make sense? It doesn't make a lot of sense. These are the discussions the British and American general staffs behind the scenes had during World War II. You want us to destroy Germany? Then what? Who supplants Germany? The Soviet Union. Is that our goal? You understand what I'm saying? I'm following. Trump did a good thing. He said, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to support it. And of course, donors everywhere were very unhappy because they donated prolifically to that administration in the hopes of bringing on a war with Iran. Remember, it was who said every morning, I get up and pray that we go to war with Iran, and he was advising John McCain, and McCain was an advocate for going to war with Iran. McCain was saying, we'll fight the Russians, we'll stand by you. This is before he passed away. I mean, this is lunacy. What is happening? Who is in charge? The American people don't know what war means. I've seen a country devastated by war. I've seen more than one. They don't understand that we are no longer in a position of splendid isolation where we can destroy other people's homes without risking the same here. When you start dealing with the Russians and the Chinese, all sorts of potentially bad things can happen. If you think Mexico is our friend, I have news for you. The Mexicans have always sided with whomever was against the United States. So is Venezuela, and so is Cuba. Now, do you really want to go to war with these people and then have a second front in the Caribbean in Latin America? Do you want to be dragged into that? No one is thinking. There is no strategic thought, and no one is thinking about the American people. What's in the interest of the American people? You know what's in the interest of the American people? Build prosperity, recover this economy, repatriate jobs, get control of the border, stop the influx of labor that we can't employ. And if we believe the AI fanatics who are telling us that by 2040 or something, 80% of all the current low-skilled jobs will be replaced by AI, what are we bringing most of these people in to do? It's insane, doesn't make any sense. So who's thinking about the United States? American society. American society. American society.